Hey, it's Stephen, and tonight, I've got a Christmas story that's gonna make you rethink the holiday season. We all know that Christmas is supposed to be a time of peace and joy, but sometimes, there's a darkness lurking behind the holiday cheer. Tonight's story comes from a long-time listener, and it's one of those that'll stick with you, crawl under your skin, and stay there long after you hear it. So, get comfortable, maybe keep a light on, because you're about to hear about the Christmas that shouldn't have been. It was Christmas Eve, 1977, and the snow had started to fall just as it always did around this time. The roads were slick with ice, and the quiet of the night was broken only by the soft thrum of the heater and the occasional crack of the wind against the windows. But for all its beauty, Christmas in the small town of Hollow Creek always had a strange energy to it. The people there were friendly enough, but there was an unspoken rule. You didn't ask questions about the past, about the town, about the strange things that seemed to happen every year. For Jenny, a college student home for the holiday, it was her first Christmas back in Hollow Creek in years. Her parents had insisted on her staying with them, even though she was old enough to stay at the dorm. She reluctantly agreed, not wanting to upset them. After all, what harm could one Christmas back in town do? Her parents' house was old, tucked away at the edge of town, surrounded by thick trees that seemed to swallow the light. The kind of house you only visited in daylight, or else the shadows felt like they were closing in on you. Jenny didn't remember much about the house from when she was little, except the basement. There was always something wrong with the basement, something cold and unsettling, even in the height of summer, but she figured she'd forgotten about all that. It had been so long. That evening, her mom was in the kitchen, humming along to a Christmas carol while she prepared dinner. Her dad was setting up the tree, his back turned to her as he carefully hung the ornaments. Jenny sat at the table, watching the snowflakes fall outside, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Then, she heard it. A faint sound like the soft scraping of metal. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but then it happened again, louder, closer. It came from the basement. She froze, staring toward the dark door at the bottom of the stairs. The basement. She could hear it now. Something or someone was moving down there. Her dad must have noticed the look on her face, because he turned around, his eyes filled with concern. "What is it, Jenny?" I think I heard something from the basement," she said, her voice shaky. Her dad's expression shifted, his brow furrowing. "I told you to stay out of there. It's probably just the pipes. Nothing to worry about." But Jenny couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't the pipes. It wasn't the wind. The scraping sound was deliberate, like something, or someone, was trying to get out. Jenny's mom, noticing her daughter's unease, smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's just a little noise from the house settling, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." But Jenny couldn't let it go. She excused herself from the table, her heart pounding in her chest as she slowly made her way toward the basement door. The scraping had stopped, but the tension was still thick in the air. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the knob. A voice whispered in the back of her mind, "Don't open it. Don't go down there." But she had to. She had to know. She turned the knob and slowly opened the door. The stairs descended into darkness, the air cold and musty. Jenny stepped down, her footsteps echoing in the silence. With every step, the coldness seemed to grow, wrapping around her like a thick blanket. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw it. There, in the corner of the basement, was an old wooden chest, the source of the scraping sound. It had been dragged across the floor, leaving deep gouges in the concrete. Jenny's breath caught in her throat. The chest wasn't here before. She was sure of it. Her parents had never mentioned it. With trembling hands, she reached for the chest, feeling the weight of something heavy in her gut. The moment her fingers touched the cold wood, the room seemed to grow even colder. A low hum filled the air like a distant growl. She opened the chest. Inside, there was nothing but darkness. But that wasn't what terrified her. It was the note. A single piece of paper, yellowed with age, tucked inside the chest. She pulled it out, the air growing heavier with each passing second. The note read, "You should have stayed away." Jenny's blood ran cold. She turned around, but when she tried to move, her feet felt like they were cemented to the floor. The basement door slammed shut on its own. A low, guttural voice whispered from the darkness. "You shouldn't have opened it." Jenny's breath caught in her throat. The voice came from behind her, soft, cold, like it was right in her ear. She whipped around, but no one was there. Just the darkness. But in that darkness she saw something, a shadow. A figure, faint at first, but slowly becoming more solid. It was the figure of a man, hunched over, his face obscured by a black hood. His eyes, though, gleamed from beneath the darkness, black and empty. Jenny stumbled backward, her heart racing. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. He only stepped closer, his long, gnarled fingers reaching toward her. With a jolt of terror, she realized that she couldn't scream. She couldn't move. The air had turned thick, suffocating. She was trapped. Suddenly, the voice again, cold and distant. "You've opened the door and now you belong to him." Before she could react, the figure lunged forward, his hands wrapping around her throat. The pressure was unrelenting, and Jenny could feel her vision swimming. Her mind screamed for release, but her body betrayed her. The basement swirled into darkness. The next morning, Jenny's parents found the basement door wide open. But there was no sign of Jenny. No sign of a struggle. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. They searched for days, but she was never found. Every year, on Christmas Eve, the people of Hollow Creek say they hear scraping sounds from the old basement of Jenny's childhood home. They say that if you listen long enough, you can hear her voice, whispering through the walls, begging to be set free. But the thing is, no one ever does. So, next time you're in the snow, walking past an old house with dark windows, take a second to listen. You might hear something scratching at the door, trying to get out. And if you're unlucky, you might find yourself being pulled into the darkness, just like Jenny did. There you have it. A Christmas story you won't forget in a hurry. Some doors shouldn't be opened. Some houses shouldn't be entered. And some Christmas spirits don't ever rest. Stay safe out there this holiday season, and remember, not all gifts come wrapped in paper. Some come with shadows, and some, once opened, never let go. Story 2. I've got another story for you that will make you look at your Christmas decorations a little differently this year. We all know that Christmas lights are meant to bring warmth, comfort, and joy, but sometimes they bring something darker. This story comes from one of our listeners, a guy who swears he'll never celebrate Christmas the same way again. If you're one of those people who love to go all out with the holiday decorations, well, maybe you'll think twice after hearing this. So, grab a drink, settle in, and get ready to hear about the Christmas lights that weren't meant to shine. It was Christmas Eve, 1994. Tom had always been the guy who went all out with Christmas decorations. His neighbors would joke about his lights being brighter than the town's tree, and his yard looked like a scene out of a Christmas movie. But Tom didn't care. For him, it was all about the spirit of the season, making everything perfect for his family and the kids in the neighborhood. This year, he'd decided to go even bigger. He'd spent days in the cold hanging lights on the house, covering every inch of the lawn with inflatable Santas, reindeer, and snowmen. But there was one thing he couldn't find that he'd been searching for, an antique Christmas tree topper. He had seen it in a local antique store earlier that year and immediately fell in love with it. A hand-carved angel, with glass eyes that seemed to shimmer in the light. It was beautiful, and it would complete his perfect holiday display. On Christmas Eve, after the kids had gone to bed, Tom couldn't resist any longer. He decided to make a quick trip to the store, hoping to get there before closing time. He grabbed his coat, hopped in the car, and drove through the quiet, snow-covered streets of their small town. The streets were empty, just the way he liked them. The Christmas lights along the town square twinkled, casting a soft glow on the snow, but something felt off. Tom couldn't put his finger on it, but the air felt thick, heavy, as though something was waiting for him. When he reached the antique store, the lights were still on. He walked in, the bell over the door jingling as he entered. The shopkeeper, an old man with graying hair and a long, white beard, looked up from behind the counter. He smiled warmly. "Evening, sir. Can I help you with something?" Tom nodded. "I was hoping you still had that tree topper. The angel one." The shopkeeper's smile faded, just for a moment, but Tom didn't notice. "Ah yes, that one." The old man walked toward a back shelf and pulled out the angel topper. "It's a beautiful piece, isn't it?" Tom stared at it. The angel was perfect, just like he remembered. Its glass eyes sparkled in the light, and the hand-carved details seemed almost lifelike. It was exactly what he had been searching for. He handed over the money without hesitation. The shopkeeper took the money but hesitated before giving it to Tom. "There's one thing I should warn you about," he said, his voice low. "That angel has a history. People say it's not just a decoration. Some people say it watches you." Tom chuckled, trying to brush off the eerie feeling that had crept into the air. "It's just an ornament, right?" The old man gave him a long, serious look. "Sometimes things aren't always just what they seem. But it's your choice." Tom nodded, dismissing the warning. He was just excited to get home and finish his decorations, but when he got back to his house, he felt an odd unease. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way the wind howled outside, or the way the Christmas lights on his lawn seemed to flicker just a bit too much. But it wasn't enough to stop him. He climbed the ladder, placed the angel on top of the tree, and stepped back to admire his work. That's when it happened. The lights outside, the ones that had been flickering, suddenly went out. All of them. The entire yard plunged into darkness. Tom froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He stepped away from the ladder and moved toward the front door. Outside, in the streetlight, he could see the outlines of his decorations. His inflatables, his reindeer, standing eerily still, as if frozen in time. He turned back to the house and the tree, hoping it was just a power surge. But when he looked at the angel atop the tree, something was wrong. The eyes, they were glowing. A faint, unnatural red light flickered from within the glass eyes of the angel, like embers in a fire. Tom felt his skin crawl. He reached up and grabbed the angel, trying to pull it off the tree. But as his hands touched it, he felt a shock run through him, like an electric current. He yanked his hand away, but the angel didn't let go. It felt alive. The lights outside suddenly flickered back on, but now something had changed. The decorations on the lawn, the ones that had been lifeless moments before, now seemed to be watching him. The snowmen, the reindeer, even the Santa, all their eyes were glowing with the same eerie red light. And as Tom's eyes scanned the yard, he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the distance, by the street light, he saw a figure standing in the shadows. A man, tall and thin, dressed in a long, dark coat, watching him. Tom's breath caught in his throat. The man didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stood there, staring. Suddenly, the wind picked up again, howling through the trees, and the man disappeared into the darkness. But Tom could still feel his gaze, heavy and cold, as though the man was still watching from the shadows. He hurried inside, locking the door behind him. His heart raced, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was coming, and it was coming for him. That night, Tom couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind, made him jump. The angel on top of the tree glowed with that same eerie red light, casting a shadow that seemed to stretch across the room. He could hear faint whispers, too quiet to make out, but they were there, just at the edge of his hearing. And then, around midnight, the power went out again. This time, it wasn't just the lights. Everything in the house went dark. The silence was suffocating. Tom grabbed a flashlight and made his way downstairs, hoping to find the fuse box. But as he stepped into the living room, he froze. The angel, its eyes were now wide open, and the faint whispers he had been hearing were coming from it. "No," he whispered, taking a step back. Suddenly, the front door burst open, the wind howling into the house. Tom turned, his flashlight shaking in his hand, and there, standing in the doorway, was the man from the street. He was taller now, his face twisted, but his eyes were glowing with that same red light. Tom didn't have time to scream. The man lunged, and everything went black. When the neighbors found Tom the next morning, the house was eerily quiet. The decorations outside were still up, but everything was different. The angel on top of the tree was gone. The lights on the lawn were dark. Tom was never seen again. Some say he was taken, consumed by whatever force had controlled those lights. Others say they can still hear him sometimes, calling out from the darkness. But one thing is for sure, the Christmas lights weren't meant to shine. So, next time you're putting up your decorations, remember Tom. Remember the angel, the lights, and the man who watched from the shadows. Maybe some things are better left in the dark. And whatever you do, don't let the lights fool you. They're watching. Story 3. I've got another story that's going to make you rethink your Christmas traditions. We all know that feeling of nostalgia we get when we pull out those old decorations, right? The smell of the tree, the twinkling lights, and the music playing softly in the background. But sometimes, what's familiar isn't always safe. Sometimes, it's something darker that waits in the shadows of Christmas past. This story comes from one of our listeners, who thought he was doing something special for his family. Little did he know that one decision would lead him into a nightmare he could never escape. Trust me, you won't look at your holiday decor the same way after this. So, grab your hot cocoa and settle in. This one's gonna stick with you long after you hear it. It was a week before Christmas in 1987, and Mark had just moved his family into an old house on the outskirts of town. The house was perfect for the holidays, spacious, cozy, and just the right amount of charm. The kind of place that could be straight out of a Christmas movie. Mark was determined to make it their best Christmas yet, especially for his two kids, Emma and Luke. The first thing Mark did when they arrived was pull out all of the Christmas decorations. He'd been saving them for years, waiting for the perfect home to display them in. The lights, the ornaments, the garlands, it was all there. But there was one thing that stood out from the rest. One piece that seemed almost too beautiful for this old house. It was an antique Christmas tree topper, a star hand-carved and painted in shades of gold and silver. He had found it in a dusty corner of an antique shop the year before, and it had caught his eye immediately. Something about it felt special, even magical. Mark had been looking for the perfect topper for years, and this one was it. When the kids went to bed that night, Mark couldn't wait to finish decorating. He placed the star on top of the tree, stood back to admire his work, and smiled. For a moment, everything felt perfect. The house was warm, the tree glittered in the dim light, and outside, the snow was falling gently in the quiet night. But then, just as he was about to go to bed, the power went out. Mark cursed under his breath and grabbed a flashlight, heading to the fuse box in the basement. The basement was cold, and the air was thick with dust. As he fumbled with the fuse box, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and for a moment, the flashlight flickered. He glanced over his shoulder, expecting to see something in the shadows, but there was nothing. He reset the fuse and made his way back upstairs. As he passed the living room, his flashlight beam fell on the Christmas tree. The lights, which had gone out just moments before, were now glowing again, casting an eerie, almost unnatural light across the room. That's when he noticed it. The star. It was no longer just a decoration. It was alive. The gold and silver painted on the star seemed to shift and move, as though the design itself was changing. The light it cast was harsh now, like the star was burning from within. Mark felt a chill run down his spine, but he couldn't look away. Something was pulling him in. And then the whispers began. Low, hushed voices filled the room. They were faint at first, like a distant conversation, but they grew louder with each passing second. Mark turned to see if the kids were awake. He needed to check on them, make sure everything was okay, but when he looked toward the stairs, he saw something that made his heart stop. There, standing at the foot of the stairs, was a figure. A tall, thin man in a long black coat, his face obscured by the shadows. Mark's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The figure didn't move. It just stared. And then, in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the depths of the earth, the man whispered, "It's time to finish it." Mark's pulse raced as he turned to the tree. The star had begun to pulse now, as if it was beating like a heart, and the whispers had turned into words, clear and chilling. "Finish it. Finish the sacrifice." Mark stumbled back, almost tripping over the coffee table. His mind raced. This couldn't be real. It had to be a trick, a hallucination, something his mind was playing on him after a long day of decorating. But when he looked back toward the stairs, the figure was gone. His heart pounded in his chest. He grabbed his phone, trying to call his wife, but the screen flickered and died. The room went completely dark again. Then, everything went silent. Not the kind of silence that's comforting, but the kind that makes you feel like you're being watched. The air grew thick with tension, as if something was pressing in from all sides. Mark's breath became shallow and his pulse quickened. The whispers returned, but now they were louder, more desperate. "You have to finish it. He's coming for you." Suddenly, the star on top of the tree flickered violently and then exploded in a flash of blinding light. Mark screamed. His eyes shut tight against the light. When he opened them again, everything had changed. The house was no longer warm and welcoming. The air was freezing cold, and the Christmas lights, now glowing a blood red, stretched out of the tree and spiraled around the walls, like vines reaching for him. The room felt alive in a way that made Mark's stomach turn. The furniture shifted slightly, as though the house itself was breathing, expanding and contracting in the darkness. And then, the figure appeared again, but this time, it wasn't just standing in the shadows. It was in front of him, standing between him and the door, its face now visible. But what Mark saw made his blood run cold. The man's face was twisted and decayed, like something that had been dead for years. His eyes were hollow, and his smile stretched unnaturally wide, exposing teeth that were sharp and yellowed. "You took it," the figure hissed. "Now you must pay the price." Mark stumbled backward, his heart hammering in his chest. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The air around him was suffocating, and he could feel the walls closing in. He turned toward the stairs, but they were no longer there. Instead, the hallway stretched into an endless abyss. The whispers grew louder, overlapping each other. "It's your fault. You brought it here. You've opened the door. There's no escape." And then everything went black. The next morning, Mark's wife returned to the house to find everything eerily still. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, the star once again glowing softly, but there was no sign of Mark. His phone was found on the ground, cracked and shattered. His keys were in the entryway, but he was gone. Some say they still hear the whispers on Christmas Eve. They say if you listen closely, you can hear Mark's voice, pleading for help, trapped somewhere in the walls of the house. The decorations are still there, but no one dares to touch them anymore. The star still shines, waiting for someone else to make the same mistake. So, before you hang that shiny new tree topper this year, just remember, not every ornament is meant to stay in the light. Some things belong in the dark, and if you're not careful, the darkness will come for you. Story 4. I've got a story, read it, that'll make you rethink your next trip to the attic, and the ghosts that might be hiding there. This one's not about curses or monsters lurking under the bed. No, it's about something much darker. A Christmas gift forgotten for years, only to be unearthed in a place where the past still lingers. Some gifts are never meant to be opened. Some memories, well, they should stay buried. But tonight, I'm gonna take you on a journey back to a house that's seen more than its fair share of secrets. Sit back, relax, and listen closely. The story of the Forgotten Christmas Gift is one you won't soon forget. The Forgotten Christmas Gift. It was the winter of 2024 when Mark Jensen found himself standing in front of his childhood home. The house that had once been a place of laughter, warmth, and holiday traditions now felt like a shell of its former self, silent, cold, and shrouded in an eerie stillness. The windows were boarded up, the roof sagging under years of neglect, and the garden, once full of vibrant flowers, had long since turned into an overgrown tangle of weeds and dead leaves. The passing years had been hard on the old house, and Mark had always promised himself that one day he would come back, reclaim it, and restore it to its former glory. After all, it had been his parents' home. They had raised him there, and the house held memories of every Christmas, every birthday, every family dinner. But now, standing at the decaying doorstep, Mark wasn't sure if it was nostalgia or regret that brought him here. He pushed open the door with a creak that echoed through the empty halls, a sound that seemed to carry a weight of its own, like it was reminding him of the years that had slipped by without him ever looking back. His footsteps disturbed the dust on the wooden floors, and the musty smell of old furniture and forgotten memories hit him like a punch in the gut. Mark moved through the house slowly, as though expecting to find the ghosts of his past lingering in every corner. He passed the living room, where the Christmas tree used to stand, its twinkling lights illuminating the space. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, a soft and comforting sound that seemed to belong to another lifetime. The house was now a shadow of what it once was, but Mark knew that the heart of it, the memories, would never truly leave. He made his way to the attic, the only place in the house that remained mostly untouched. The ladder creaked beneath his weight as he ascended, the dim light from his flashlight barely illuminating the space. The attic was cluttered with old boxes, yellowed photographs, and forgotten belongings that his parents had never gotten rid of. It was like stepping into a time capsule, a place where the past had been frozen in time. Mark had come here looking for something, anything, that might help him make sense of why he had left so abruptly when his parents had died. Maybe he had been too young to understand the significance of the house back then, or maybe he had just been running from the pain of losing them. But now, years later, he was ready to face it. As he sifted through the boxes, he found the usual assortment of old toys, Christmas decorations, and family keepsake. But then, buried beneath a stack of forgotten wrapping paper, he found something that stopped him in his tracks, a small, unmarked gift box. The box was wrapped in faded red paper, the edges frayed from age. There was no tag, no name written on it, nothing to indicate who it was for. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He didn't recognize it, but there was something unsettling about it. It looked old, much older than the other items in the attic. The box seemed to be waiting for him, as if it had been preserved for this very moment. He hesitated, then carefully unwrapped the gift. Inside, nestled in soft tissue paper, was a small porcelain doll. It was a delicate thing, no taller than a hand, dressed in a faded blue gown with lace trim. Its glass eyes stared up at him with an intensity that felt almost alive. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen this doll before, yet it felt strangely familiar. There was something about it that unsettled him. Perhaps it was the fact that it looked like a doll his mother might have given him when he was younger, or maybe it was the fact that it seemed to hold a presence, an energy that he couldn't quite place. He set the doll down on the attic floor, its eyes still locked on him, and examined the box more closely. As he ran his fingers along the edges of the box, he felt something cold, a small, metal key hidden in the lining. He pulled it out, its surface smooth and shiny, despite its age. It was old, too, but there was no doubt it was meant to open something. The key felt heavy in his hand, as if it were carrying the weight of something important. Mark's curiosity deepened. What was this key for? And why had it been hidden away with the doll? He began to search the attic more frantically now, turning over boxes and crates in search of something that might explain the mystery. But no matter how hard he searched, he found nothing that seemed to match the key. Frustrated, he stood up, gazing around the attic. That's when something caught his eye, a small, dusty trunk tucked away in the corner. It wasn't large, but it had a sturdy, locked clasp, and Mark could have sworn it hadn't been there before. As he approached the trunk, he felt the weight of the key in his pocket, as though it was guiding him, urging him to open it. He knelt down and inserted the key into the lock. It turned easily, as though it had been waiting for this moment. The lid creaked open, and Mark's heart skipped a beat. Inside the trunk was an old journal, bound in cracked leather, and several faded photographs. The journal was thick, its pages yellowed and fragile, but it felt oddly warm to the touch. Mark flipped it open, and the first words he saw sent a chill down his spine. December 24th, 1965. The doll is here. I've locked it away where no one can find it. It's the only way to keep it safe, but I'm not sure how much longer I can protect them. Mark's pulse quickened. The journal seemed to be written by someone close to his parents, but the tone was unsettling. Whoever had written this was clearly afraid of something. He skimmed through the pages, each entry more cryptic and disturbing than the last. There were mentions of strange occurrences, of whispers in the night, and of the doll. But the final entry was what made Mark's blood run cold. I've made the mistake of bringing it back. The doll isn't just a toy, it's something else. Something dark. I don't know how much longer we have. I pray that no one ever finds it. Mark slammed the journal shut, his mind racing. What was going on? Why was this doll so important? And why had his parents, his mother especially, kept it hidden away for so long? As Mark stood there, clutching the journal in his hands, the attic door creaked open behind him. He spun around, but no one was there. The house felt colder suddenly, the shadows in the corners deeper. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. That whatever had been waiting in this house, in the attic, for all these years, was watching him now. The doll's eyes gleamed in the dim light, and that was when Mark realized, some gifts, no matter how forgotten, are never meant to be unwrapped. The house grew colder with each passing minute. Mark could hear the whispers now, low and unintelligible, as if the walls themselves were murmuring secrets that had been buried for far too long. He turned to leave, but the attic door slammed shut with a deafening bang. His breath caught in his throat as he scrambled for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in, and he spun back around. The doll was gone. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he frantically searched the attic. He was sure he had left it there, but now it was nowhere to be found. The shadows seemed to stretch and grow in the corners of the room, closing in on him. The cold air felt like it was pressing against his skin, suffocating him. Suddenly, a voice, a faint, eerie whisper, came from behind him. "You shouldn't have opened it." Mark turned quickly, but no one was there. He could feel the weight of eyes on him, though, as if something was watching him, waiting for him to make his next move. A soft giggle echoed in the stillness of the attic. Mark's breath hitched. His mind raced. He had to get out. He had to leave this place before whatever was here could find him. But the attic door still wouldn't open. Then, through the growing shadows, Mark saw it, standing in the far corner of the room, the porcelain doll. Its eyes gleamed with something dark, something unnatural. Its mouth was open, and Mark could swear it was smiling at him. And then, the whispers grew louder, surrounding him, drowning him in their suffocating cadence. The doll had been waiting for him all along.